What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everybody's doing well out there today. We're just a few days away from Christmas, so happy holidays, Merry Christmas to all of you and your families out there. We greatly appreciate your support, but here we are, fantasy playoffs, fantasy championships for a lot of people, and there's always a lot of quarterbacks to choose from on a weekly basis, right? But the last time you really want to take a gamble is in week 16 of your fantasy playoffs, your championship game, and really have it backfire in your face. There's a few guys that maybe in the past have been weekly starts that may not be here this week, and we're going to break down every matchup going into week 16. But before we do, how did we do in week 15? Well, we didn't do half bad. Out of the 28 quarterbacks we gave a start or sit designation to that played this past weekend, 20 of them were correct for an accuracy percentage of 71%. Now, some of our biggest misses, Matt Ryan went out, kind of looked like the Matt Ryan we expected a lot this year. The problem is we haven't seen it very much, do we, this week? We'll talk about it here in a few minutes. Baker Mayfield continues to be the bake show here, end of season. And Ryan Finley, are you kidding me? I'll gladly take a miss on Ryan Finley because we're never starting Ryan Finley on a weekly basis. Some of the bigger hits, Jalen Hurts had himself a ball game, finishing as quarterback 1 overall. We threw him way up in the rankings last week. Hopefully you benefited from it. Tom Brady, he's out there playing well, and Phillip Rivers just continues to find that fountain of youth and play great down the stretch. But now we head into week 16, some difficult matchups, and we're going to kick it off here. First game of the week between the Minnesota Vikings and New Orleans Saints. They're on Christmas, and it was great to see Drew Brees back last week. Back a little bit sooner than a lot of people had expected, right? I mean, we expected him to miss maybe a little bit more time because Taysom Hill wasn't playing bad. Well, Drew Brees came back. Didn't look the greatest, I guess you could say. Completed less than 50% of his passes, and that's really strange because Drew is usually hovering right around that 70% completion mark or so, and we're not seeing it, right? Timing was a little bit off, but once again, no Michael Thomas. He needs to really rely on some of these bigger plays from his running backs, Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray, and luckily, he's got a couple guys that can get those big plays. Now, he's been basically without Michael Thomas majority of the season, yet he's yet to score less than 16 fantasy points in a game in which he started. So I really don't worry too much about Drew Brees. He seemed to get a little bit better as the game progressed. A matchup this week against the Vikings, they allow right around 18 fantasy points per game. The ceiling just may be a little bit lower until Drew Brees can get back to maybe the game form we saw earlier in the season. He's still going to be a start, just more of a lower end start here this week. For Cousins, we can basically almost say the same thing here in this situation here this week, right? A lower ceiling going up against a difficult defense in the New Orleans Saints. They're actually 6th in the NFL against opposing quarterbacks, giving up only 17 fantasy points per game. But the floor is just too good for Kirk Cousins right now. He's got 7 straight games over 18 fantasy points, which is wonderful. And he's showing some of that scrambling ability as of late. Not something we expect from Kirk Cousins, but we will gladly take it. Plus, he's protecting the football. Only 3 interceptions over his last 8 weeks played. He's a solid quarterback too, and a low-end start for me here once again to kick off the week. Now we move on to Saturday football. First game, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Detroit Lions, and how big are the huevos on Matthew Stafford? I mean, it's rhetorical. I really don't care to find out. The dude is out there. He's got to be playing in some serious pain, and yet he's out there gutting it out on a weekly basis, and it doesn't sound like he's going to be sitting anytime soon, but you can just tell he's not 100%. He now finishes outside the top 15, 4 out of his last 5 games played. It's not a bad matchup this week going up against Tampa Bay, but I'm not going to risk it with this injury. The way that this is going to work is he's 1 sack away basically from just saying, hey, if I can't make it anymore, and I don't know if I want to go into a game and assume that risk, being that he already has that injury. So I'm going to pass on Matthew Stafford this week, but for Tom Brady, not the case, right? I definitely want to start Tom Brady this week against the Detroit Lions, who allow the 4th most fantasy points to opposing quarterback. He's thrown at least 2 passing touchdowns, 8 out of his last 9 games played. He's got a super safe floor, a super high ceiling, and a good matchup this week. He's going to be a top 10 option for me here in week 16. Love me some Tom Brady against the Lions. Next game up, San Francisco, Arizona, and oh, what could have been in this game. Well, I don't think we were that close to seeing it, but still, Josh Rosen is now a member of the San Francisco 49ers. Had he not tested positive for COVID, he may have played quarterback in this game because Nick Mullins is going to be hurt, and they were down to just C.J. Beathard. Could you imagine Josh Rosen coming back, signing with the Niners, and then playing his first game against Arizona, who drafted him in the first round and basically just cut bait to get Kyler Murray? I mean, that would have been a sight to see here. It would have just been so 2020, right? But it didn't happen, so we're left with CJ Beathard. Are we going to consider CJ Beathard in our fantasy championship? That's a no. We're not even going to discuss CJ Beathard. He's not a thought as of right now. I mean, what about for Arizona, though? What should we do with Kyler Murray? You should definitely start Kyler Murray because he seems to be getting back to his early season form. Just last week, threw for 406 yards, had 4 touchdowns to 1 interception. He was quarterback 4 overall. That's definitely what we need to see here, end of season from Kyler Murray. He is still, as of right now, the number 1 overall quarterback in all things fantasy football, has 10 more points than Patrick Mahomes. And despite having a rough stretch here, middle to end of the season, has still been putting up super solid numbers, and I'm not going to even consider sitting him here in week 16. Which takes us to the Miami Dolphins, Las Vegas Raiders, and Tua has established himself as a pretty, solid fantasy asset here end of season, right? He now has 3 straight games over 17 fantasy points scored, but they could go even higher, right? Don't forget Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki, he's missing them in this offense. Does he get them back this week? As of right now, they're both practicing on a limited basis. But that's something we need to pay attention to here as the week progresses because the Raiders, they allow just over 20 fantasy points per game, 9th most in the NFL. At this exact point in time, I'm going to sit Tua until we can figure out what's going on with the weapons, Parker and Gesicki. If those guys are active this week, I am for sure not opposed to starting one Tua Tagovailoa here in week 16. We just need to wait and find out and see if his weapons are healthy by the weekend. For the Raiders, I was all pumped to talk about Marcus Mariota, and I don't know if I should or not because now word is coming out that Derek Carr is back at practice. Who's going to start this week? Should they just let Carr rest, and should they go with Mariota? It's a big mess as of right this second because a lot of people weren't expecting Derek Carr to be ready in time, but I think he saw after that performance of Mariota last week that he needs to get back pretty quick if he wants his job back because Mariota came out and lit it up last week, and now a matchup going up against the Miami Dolphins, who allow right around 17 fantasy points per game. They are the 7th best defense against opposing quarterbacks, but still not a bad option here if it's Marcus Mariota. And let me preface that. Pay attention here once again because if Mariota is the starting quarterback in this game with that type of rushing upside that we saw this past week, I don't mind starting him, especially in 2 quarterback leagues, super flex leagues. I don't hate Marcus Mariota. No, he's not going to be within the top 12 and a must start, but he's somebody to pay attention to. If for some reason Carr gets the start, dealing with a groin issue, the last thing that I really want to do is trust a quarterback with a groin issue. If he starts to scramble, push off on that back foot, anything could tweak that groin and he could be out in a heartbeat, and that's not a risk worth taking. As of right now, I'll start Mariota if he starts, but if it's Carr, I'm going to sit him here this week. Now we move over to Sunday football, Carolina Panthers, Washington football team, or you could just call it the Ron Rivera revenge game if you want to, because he really wants to win this game, and his team wants to win it for him. The problem is firepower, right? I mean, you got Dwayne Haskins, who was penciled in to be the starter. He basically said, F every COVID protocol. I'm going to go make it rain in a strip club after losing last week. And then you got Alex Smith, who's not 100% healthy. Now, it sounds like if Smith can't go, that Haskins will be the quarterback as long as nothing pops up here the next couple days. But they just don't have the ceiling, right? They just don't have that firepower in this offense to really go out there and be a safe start. So we're not going to consider starting anybody in Washington. But what about Teddy B? I mean, Teddy B's been kind of up and down, right? Super solid to start the year, kind of tailed off here towards the middle, and then he's finally starting to creep back up a little bit, but he hasn't had a multi-touchdown passing game since week 10, however, has scored at least 18 fantasy points in back-to-back weeks. Washington allows right around 17 fantasy points per game, and Teddy, we know, has weapons, right? DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, Robbie Anderson, Mike Davis-ish, right? But I mean, he doesn't have bad options here, and we know that the Carolina Panthers are going to want to go out there and win this game also against their former coach. I don't hate the start of Teddy B here this week. Not an absolute must start, but a start nonetheless. Colts and Steelers, and is this the end of the Rivers run? Because he's been on a total tear here, end of season. 6 straight games with at least 18 fantasy points scored for Phillip Rivers. But the schedule's been fairly easy. 2 against Tennessee, 2 against Houston. The Raiders had a difficult matchup against the Packers, but that was about it. Pittsburgh's number 2 in the NFL against opposing fantasy quarterbacks, allowing only 15.5 fantasy points per game. But they did just get beat by Ryan Finley and the Bengals. So that's a little bit concerning, right? I mean, Pittsburgh doesn't look the same as they did the first half of the NFL season. Do I really want to risk it here with Pittsburgh being back at home after being embarrassed, looking to bounce back? This may be the end of the Rivers run. I don't think he plays bad, but I don't think we see that ceiling that we've seen here in weeks past against lesser opponents. So I'm going to sit Philip Rivers here this week. But what about Big Ben? I mean, the dude is fading quickly, right? I mean, you can just see that the arm strength is dwindling by the week. He's gotten worse over the past 3 straight weeks. Now, remember in the offseason, he had that experimental elbow surgery that not a lot of people really knew a lot about. Maybe, it held together just fine to start the season, but as the season has progressed, it's slowly just, working itself out and getting a little bit weaker as time goes on. That is entirely possible. We're starting to see more interceptions. He's got interceptions now thrown in 5 straight games. A difficult matchup going up against Indianapolis, who allows right around 17 fantasy points per game. I'm worried about Big Ben going forward because this offense just doesn't look the same. And now, all of a sudden, an offense with all of those weapons, with Juju, with Claypool, with James Washington, Deontay Johnson, Eric Ebron. The running game has always pretty much been non-existent for the most part, but that high-powered passing attack can't get the ball down the field, and now all of a sudden he's super big play dependent, which makes him a huge risk on game day. It's your fantasy championship, and in my opinion, there's too many red flags surrounding Big Ben. It's going to be a sit for me in Week 16. Falcons and Chiefs, and we already know we're going to start Patrick Mahomes every single week, and it's a game against Atlanta, who allows over 24 fantasy points per game. Yeah, not a question. We're starting Mahomes for sure, but what about Matty Ice? I've been off the Matt Ryan bandwagon here as of late just because the consistency hasn't been there at all for this offense as a whole, and then he goes out this past week and absolutely explodes, has his best game since week 6. 10 weeks ago, almost, it was 9 weeks ago at the time. I mean, that's a large span of time without a big game. It was his first time where he's had at least 40 pass attempts in a game since week 7. Now, Kansas City does allow right around 19.5 fantasy points per game. I do expect Kansas City to be able to score, which means Matt Ryan's going to have to continue to throw the ball. Do they have Julio Jones back? That's something to pay attention to. Not really much of a resemblance of a run game in Atlanta. We know Todd Gurley is the number 2 now behind Ito Smith, if that tells you anything. Matt Ryan is going to have to throw a lot to have any chance in this ball game. If he gets Julio back, it only makes it better. But due to the volume alone and having Calvin Ridley, who is a legit wide receiver 1 right now, I'm going to go ahead and start Matt Ryan. He'll be closer to the bottom half of my top 12, but he will be a start here this week. Bears and Jags, and you know what I like? I like biscuits. Do you like biscuits? I mean, I could just go for a big old bowl of Mitchie biscuits right now. That's right, I love me some Mitch Magic here in Week 16 going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who allow the second most fantasy points out of all teams in the NFL to opposing quarterbacks. Mitch could easily go out there and put up a 20-burger this week in Week 16. Kind of just fitting for 2020, right? That your fantasy championship could be won with Mitch Trubisky as your starting quarterback. Now, honestly, this is really going to come down to what other options you have. You haven't been, reliant on Trubisky all season long. Maybe you have another better option ahead of us. So make sure you check out our rankings video here in the coming days. But Mitch Magic, I do not hate whatsoever this week for the Chicago Bears. We know he has the weapons. We know he has the scrambling upside. And now with the running game clicking, it's making the passing game a little bit easier. So as of right now, going to be a start for me here this week. For Minshew, no. I mean, the dude just doesn't have it anymore, right? This whole team just doesn't have it in Jacksonville. They're trying to win the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes at the moment, and I think, Gardner Minshew knows this, and he's kind of just deflated a little bit. He came in with a slight spark a couple weeks ago, and it's just going to fade, right? I mean, we can't get enough scoring opportunities in Jacksonville to give him that higher ceiling. The floor is super low. In a tough matchup going up against Chicago, can't risk it with Gardner Minshew this week. Bengals and Texans, and look at Ryan Finley. Ryan Finley going out there, scoring over 18 fantasy points and beating the Pittsburgh Steelers. But come on, the dude had more rush attempts than completed passes. Yeah, sure, he pulled off an upset against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but does that mean we're going to start him the following week against the Houston Texans in our fantasy championships? Hell no. We aren't starting Ryan Finley here this week. For Deshaun Watson, yes, we will start Deshaun Watson in what is probably the best matchup he's seen here in quite a while. Going up against Cincinnati, who allows just about 18 fantasy points per game. He has scored, Deshaun Watson has 20 fantasy points 4 out of the last 5 games played, and that's despite having some pretty difficult matchups over the last few weeks. He's currently quarterback 6 overall, but with a matchup here going up against the Cincinnati Bengals, I easily have him within my top 12 this week and somebody who I have no issue starting whatsoever in Week 16. Giants and Ravens, and it sounds like the return of Danny Dimes. Daniel Jones could be back for the Giants here this weekend, but does it really matter? I mean, the dude's only thrown for 1 touchdown since November 3rd. I mean, it's almost Christmas, y'all. I mean, 1 touchdown since November 3rd. He's been banged up with an ankle injury. Is that mobility hurting? Possibly, and that's really where he gets that safer floor, is that scrambling upside. Going up against Baltimore, not the hardest to throw on, not the worst matchup for Daniel Jones, but no. Not happening, not taking that risk this week. But the same can be said for Lamar Jackson, right? I mean, the dude is absolutely sucking lately for fantasy football. Just kidding. Just want to make sure you were paying attention because Lamar Jackson is carrying teams to championships right now. 3 straight top 6 finishes, 3+ touchdowns in 3 straight games, 253 yards rushing combined over his last 3 games played. It took a while, right? It took a while to start the season. He was a safe floor guy, but we didn't see that ceiling for the entire first half of the NFL season. Well, we're seeing it now. It's happening at the right time. This offense is clicking, and Lamar Jackson is cemented in your quarterback slot once again. Browns and Jets in the Bake Show continues, right? I mean, Baker Mayfield is on fire now. 4 straight finishes inside the top 12 quarterbacks, 11 touchdowns to only 1 interception over the last month of games. Baker Mayfield looks great in this offense and now gets a matchup against the Jets, who allow the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Absolutely love it. This offense in Cleveland finally has an identity. Kevin Stefanski has built a winner in Cleveland, and he's doing it with Baker Mayfield. There's a lot of Baker haters out there, but in this type of offensive scheme, we're seeing Baker Mayfield excel because it's not all on his shoulders. When that happens, he makes mistakes. When he utilizes the weapons around him like they are right now in Cleveland, he's dangerous, and Baker Mayfield's going to be a start here this week for the Jets. And Sam Darnold, not a shot in hell is he going into my lineup. I don't care who he's playing, when he's playing. If he's a member of the Jets, I'm not starting him. Yeah, sure, the Jets pulled off a huge upset last week against the Los Angeles Rams. A huge win for them. Their first win of the season. Sam Darnold finished as quarterback 26, and over his last 6 starts only has 1 finish inside the top 26 quarterbacks. Pass on Sam Darnold. Broncos and Chargers, and actually, I like both the guys in this game. I really think that they have an opportunity to have a super solid game. Justin Herbert, we saw him return to the top 10 last week, which is a very, welcome sight for a lot of his fantasy owners. And these two faced off week 8 this season, and Justin Herbert in that game finished as quarterback 4 overall. Denver still allows over 20 fantasy points per game. We're really hoping that Keenan Allen and Mike Williams can be a little bit healthier because that's what gives him that safer floor. We already know the ceiling will always be there. Even if he's throwing to Jalen Guyton all game, we're going to see points once again from Justin Herbert. He'll remain a start. For Drew Lock, more of a quarterback 2. He's going to be a sit for me here because I don't think he's somebody that we can really trust in 10 or 12-man leagues. 2 quarterback leagues, Superflex leagues, DFS lineups. I don't mind Drew Lock here this week going up against the Los Angeles Chargers. He finished as quarterback 7 in their last meeting, which was week 8, and the Chargers still allow over 20 fantasy points per game. The biggest issue with Drew Lock has been consistency, right? We've seen some super low floors, and that worries us on starting him on a weekly basis, but that ceiling is there. Can he get it this week? I think there's a good chance of it. He'll be listed as a sit, but if you're building some DFS lineups, don't forget about Drew Lock. Eagles and Cowboys, and Jalen Hurts is a legit quarterback here in the NFL. Last week, quarterback 1 overall in fantasy football, had 338 yards passing, 63 yards rushing, 4 touchdowns, and this offense in Philadelphia it just looks different with him under center, right? They look like they have a chance every single week. With Carson Wentz, you're like, hopefully they can pull it out in the end. No, Jalen Hurts is giving them opportunities to score, and you can see it, and now this may be his best matchup yet so far, going up against the Dallas Cowboys defense, who allows over 20 fantasy points per game. He's going to be solidified inside my top 12 rankings. The rushing upside alone gives him that safe floor. Love some Jalen Hurts. He'll be a start for me here this week. For Andy Dalton, the dude is consistent. I mean, at least we can say he's gotten consistent in this offense. Better than he was when he first started, when Dak Prescott went down. He's going to score you right around 15 to 18 fantasy points on a weekly basis. He does have at least 2 passing touchdowns, though, in 4 out of his last 5 games played. That's what's giving him that consistent floor. Now, Philadelphia, kind of a middle-of-the-pack pass defense. We know that Darius Slay is banged up. He's not a bad start this week. More of a mid-quarterback 2. Somebody else we think about maybe in Superflex leagues, 2-quarterback leagues, DFS lineups. In regular formats, though, no. Andy Dalton this week, not worth the risk. Still going to be a sit. Rams and Seahawks, and this is a bad spot for Russell Wilson and his fantasy owners. I mean, he's pulling a reverse Lamar at this point. I mean, Lamar Jackson started slow, coming on super hot. Russ started super hot, starting to end a little bit slow, right? Another finish last week outside of the top 20. Now gets a matchup against the Rams, the number 1 fantasy defense against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 14 fantasy points per game. It's really crazy to say this, but Russell Wilson, just not a safe start right now. He hasn't had a 300-yard passing game since week 9 and doesn't have a game with more than 2 touchdowns over his last 6 games played. Man, this is too much risk. I mean, I hate to say this. This depends on the options on your team. I mean, if you have another great option, you consider it. I'm going to have Russell Wilson as a sit this week for the first time of the 2020 season. Russell Wilson can easily go out there and score 35 points this week, but the red flags surrounding him in this difficult matchup, it's too much for me to take. I'm going to have to sit him here this week. For Jared Goff, I don't have no warm fuzzies for him either. He's now finished outside the top 20 in 3 out of the last 4 games played, and he just lost to the Jets. The Jets. He's a potential boomer bust candidate on a weekly basis. Sure, he's got Robert Woods, he's got Cooper Kupp, he's got Tyler Higbee. He doesn't have Cam Akers, so they may throw the ball a little bit more, but does that just lead to more turnovers? You never know what you're going to get, and in a week like this, I would rather have a little bit more stability than trusting the boomer bust potential of Jared Goff. Titans and Packers, and finally a game where I like both quarterbacks, and they're both going to be starts. I mean, on one side, you got Tanny, right? You got Ryan Tannehill, who's finished inside the top 10 quarterbacks 4 out of the last 5 games he's played. He's had at least 2 touchdowns in 10 out of the last 11 starts that he's had. I mean, Ryan Tannehill is arguably one of the best quarterbacks in football. You know what you're going to get on a weekly basis. He's super safe. Kind of what we were talking about with Jared Goff, right? We just don't have that safe feeling. You have it every single week with Ryan Tannehill. He just put up some decent numbers in some difficult matchups, right? Faced off against the Baltimore Ravens, the Indianapolis Colts, scored over 20 fantasy points in each of those games. He's quarterback 7 overall on the year, and the Packers allow right around 17 fantasy points a game. With the stability of Ryan Tannehill, he's somebody who's a much safer start and somebody I don't mind here in Week 16. For Aaron Rodgers, you for sure can't sit Aaron Rodgers either, right? I mean, Tennessee allows 21 fantasy points per game, and even a bad game. A down game last week for Aaron Rodgers. A lot of people disappointed with the performance that they got from him in Week 15. He still scored 19 fantasy points. That's not a bad floor. I'll take it once again in my fantasy championships and fire up Aaron Rodgers. Bills and Patriots, and maybe earlier in the season we saw this matchup on paper and we're a little bit more excited for it, but now that it's here, it's maybe a little bit more one-sided than we had originally planned, right? Buffalo playing great football. Josh Allen playing great football. They're playing with confidence. There's no Stephon Gilmore for the New England Patriots. There's no reason not to start Josh Allen here this week. Love it. Once again, for Cam, yeah, not so much. I mean, he finally broke 20 pass attempts in a game last week. That was great to finally see, but he hasn't had a touchdown in 3 out of his last 4 games played. No passing offense whatsoever. Running backs all over the place, stealing whatever touches there are to go around. No identity of the offense. No momentum. Plus, maybe Cam's going to pout now because the team got eliminated from the playoffs. We've seen stuff like that before. There's nothing enticing about the offense right now of the New England Patriots. Heck, we may actually see Jarrett Stidham in this ballgame, so there's no way we're touching Cam here in Week 16. All right, those are my starts and sits for the quarterback position here, Week 16 fantasy football. Just a reminder, maybe you're looking for a last-minute gift. Our 2021 draft guide is for sale right now for pre-order on our website, thefantasyheadliners.com. The link is down below. You can get yourself a virtual stocking stuffer in a couple clicks of a mouse, hook up somebody for 2021 and get them all the information that they could possibly need here next year. But want to make sure we wish you and yours a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Thank you so much for the support throughout the year. All of the members of Headliner Nation greatly appreciate it. I'm speaking for everybody when I say that, but hopefully you have a great holiday season here. We look forward to talking to you. We're not going anywhere. This channel continues all year long. Leave comments down below letting us know how your championship matchups went, and we'll make sure to shout you guys out in some future videos. So put those down below. We look forward to reading those stories. Hopefully you guys have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you later.